Hey everybody, welcome back to the Print 3D channel. Now if you've been a long-time subscriber of the channel, you know that in 2017 we did our 365 project. That's where we 3D printed and shot a video for 365 days straight during the calendar year. And in December we printed out some really cool Christmas theme models. And one of them was this really cool little Droop Loop Christmas tree. Now this utilizes a 3D printing failure to create this really cool fuzzy tree look. And at the time we were doing our 365 project, we really didn't have a lot of time to do any experimenting. And I was a little apprehensive about printing a failure on my printer. But the results were pretty awesome, but we had to move on. So this year we have the gMax sized Super Duper Droop Loop Christmas Tree. Now this is over 470 millimeters tall and it turned out awesome. And I'm going to show you how we printed it today, so stick around. Hey everybody, welcome back, and thank you for joining me here on the Print 3D channel. Like I was saying in the introduction, during the 365 project in the month of December, we printed out this really cool Droop Loop Christmas tree. Now if you're unfamiliar with this process, basically it takes a 3D printing failure to create this really cool fuzzy tree look. Normally in 3D printing you want your plastic to meet another part of the model and continue on. In this instance, the little droop loops come out, stop, and come back and do not connect to anything, and then they cool off and sag down, hence creating this really cool droop loop look. Now this is a really cool model, and this is by Thingiverse user BQ3D, and I'll put that link down in the description. And this year I wanted to do something different. I'm a little bit more confident in my settings in Simplify 3D, and of course my gMax 1.5 XT Plus loves to print big things. So I thought it was time to gMax size it. So for this year we have the gMax size Super Duper Droop Loop Christmas Tree. Now this turned out awesome, and I printed out all the accessories that come with this model. Again, that link will be down in the description. And it took a little time in Simplify 3D to get this to work properly, because when you scale something up like this with single loops coming out, you're going to get multiple layers of loops for the rest of the tree. And I had to figure out how to kind of master that to still create the look and not have this big bristly hard tree just sticking out everywhere. And for the print, we used AMZ 3D Filament. Now I used 3 different colors, obviously. I used some of their green for the base of the tree. I used some of their translucent yellow for the star on the top. And then I used some of their translucent blue to create all the ornaments. And these were perfect for our tree. So let's head over to Simplify 3D, and I'll show you how I did the setup to print the tree. All right, so before we head over to Simplify 3D, I just want to show you the link here on Thingiverse for this Christmas tree model that we're printing. And this is by user BQ3D. And again, that link will be down in the description. Now you're given a few different versions of the tree. You have one with a base, and you have this really smaller version, which I've never printed. And then you have your star, and then of course you have your ornaments. Now if you download everything, you're going to probably want to print the larger version to get the same effect that we did, because I've never printed the smaller version. And of course, depending on the scale, you'll print these out at that scale as well. So let's head over to Simplify 3D, and I'll show you my settings for the tree print. Okay, so here we are in Simplify 3D, and we are using version 4.1 for this. And you can see I have 2 processes set up. For the base model of the print, we're going to use 20% infill. We have a 0.24 millimeter layer height, 3 top layers, 3 bottom layers, 2 perimeters. Now we have some variables set up for my first layer settings. We have our first layer height at 110% and the width at 110%. And we've dropped our first layer speed down to 75%. And of course, for this particular print, we're just going to use optimized start points for fastest printing speed. On the additions, we have our little skirt set up as a brim at 12 outlines. Now this is just to make sure that this print stays down on the print bed for the long print. And of course, using the droop loop, if there's any buildup and the extruder collides with it, I don't want it snapping the center post of the droop loop tree or popping off the print bed. And I would suggest you do the same. For infill, for the base only, we're going to use 20% for a fast honeycomb, because there is a flat surface on the bottom near the base. And of course, we do want this to be pretty sturdy. We're not going to use any support material. For AMZ 3D Filament, I used multiple temperatures. For the tree on this particular section, I'm using 217, and on the third layer it goes down to 213 degrees C. And of course my cooling is only set up to 75% of fan speed. Again, this is a variable you might have to adjust depending on your fan strength. You don't want it blowing the loops as they're curling. It won't give you a good look. So you may want to adjust your fan speed settings. Under speed, we're printing this out at 40 millimeters per second, but we do have some variables set up here for our outline and our solid, and that's 75% of speed. Now I've turned off the speed override because I don't want it to change speed for any part of this. In the other section, we haven't enhanced any of the bridging materials. And under the advanced section over here, we haven't enacted any of the thin wall behavior. But as you can see, we are stopping this print at 45 millimeters. Now, if you're using the variable settings wizard, you'll have to set this up that way, which you can get under here, variable settings wizard. For the branches setup, we have a completely different settings for this, and this is very important because we really want to make sure that we only get one extrusion per layer. Now, this took a little bit of figuring out to get it to work this way, and here's what I did. I increased my primary layer height to 0.36. That way I'm putting down the most amount of plastic I feel safe extruding out of my 0.5 millimeter nozzle on my gMax 1.5 XT Plus. Turned off the top and bottom solid layers and down to one perimeter. Now, of course, we've changed our variables here because we don't want to make any adjustments on that first layer that happens after the process change to 100% and optimize start points. We've turned off our skirt brim. We have 0% infill because we don't want to fill in these branches. We want them to be loops, no support material. And again, here are my temperature settings. If we go over to cooling, now this is where I should have made an adjustment, but I didn't next time. Under speeds, we're going on down to 40 millimeters per second with the same variables. And of course, under the advanced setting, now we are allowing single extrusion fill because I want to make sure that we override any kind of infill that might print, even though we have this set for 0. Sometimes Simplify 3D will add in support areas around infill. So I have this set up. This was the way it worked the best for me. So let's go ahead and hit OK, and we'll hit Prepare to Print. And before I do that, let me double click on the model and show you the scale. We're at 230.55%, 419.99, which is this 420 millimeters is the safest distance that I go on my gMax 1.5 XT Plus, because I do have a filament runout sensor at the top, and I also don't want the print head to run into the filament roll when it gets really high. So 420 millimeters is my max build volume for my gMax. So if I hit Prepare to Print, we do Select All, and we hit OK, this will process through and do our slice. Now, I'll show you the differences between slicing it with regular settings and the settings that I figured out, but I want to show you this first. So if we dial back down here and we zoom in, you can see there's the infill printing for our first process. When it gets up to the top, it starts printing out the shaft. As you can see, it's going to print out single layers. Now, it's going to show you that there's multiple layers, but what's happening is these are on a per layer basis. So if I go down to the very first layer, you can see that we've achieved the process. It actually removes itself from the center or the outside perimeter and creates our loop and comes back. So this will give us a perfect join. And if we go up to the next layer, this is already drooped down. That first layer that printed is already drooped down. And we're starting to do our second layer on top of that. This will droop down in a different direction because the laws of chaos. If we go through here, you can see that it skips a few layers, and then it starts printing again. Now this will give it plenty of time to cool off and droop down, plus printing out this center perimeter will also give it a little bit of cool down time. Now, if you look, you can see, if I go to the top view here, you can see that this is probably as far as you want to go, especially on my gMax 1.5 XT Plus with these long branches. Now I can show you a little video that I shot for social media that shows how far out these stretch out. And I'll show you that video here real quick. And as you can see, this is about as safe as I want to go on my gMax 1.5 XT Plus with this size model. So back over here in Simplify 3D, let's exit out of here, and I'm going to save this just to make sure. And let me show you what a standard looks like. So here's the tree at 100% with a standard process setup. This is my standard printing setting for my gMax setting. And as you can see, we have a 0.36 millimeter layer height. If I slice this and I show you, we're getting single branches coming out. So when you scale it, you're automatically going to increase the size of these single branches coming out, and you're increasing the width of them coming out. So that's why I addressed it with a separate setting. Now I also have a model here in the Super Tree Single. Okay, so this model that I sliced was to show you if I didn't do any of those settings. So let's hit Prepare to Print. And let's dial it down. Already you can see, if you go by the color, you have your gap fill and you have your inner perimeters, and you're getting a lot of that. Now this would create probably a stiff bristle tree instead of a Droop Loop tree. So I knew I had to make some adjustments to my settings. So if we exit out of here and we go back into our old settings, and here's the settings I did for the star, and of course I did scale this up to the same amount, 230.55%. And as you can see, there is some built-in support material. And if I hit prepare to print, you can see I put down a brim just to make sure. And of course, I did lower this into the print bed just a little bit because I noticed that the star tips weren't quite touching. So if we zoom out of here, let's go over and look at the ornament setup. And here's how I have the ornament. Now they come in one tray. If you have a multiple or multicolor or multi-extruder machine, you could probably print these out in 2 different colors, but you'd really have a big purge block. But for this print, I just did some basic settings. Again, 20% infill. For this, we did a 0.16 millimeter layer height because they are spheres, so I want them to be as round as possible, so the smaller the layer height, the better. And as you can see during the slice, there's a brim around each one of these just to make sure they all stay attached to the print bed. And I'll dial it through, and you can see you get a more perfect sphere with the lower layer height. So everything printed out really, really great, and I'm really happy with the results of all the prints. So let's head back over to the workbench, and we'll talk a little bit about our gMax sized Droop Loop Christmas tree. So now that we have all of our files set up in Simplify 3D, it was time to load the gMax up with some of the filament that we were going to use. And of course, we were going to start with the green so we could print out our tree. Now, if you follow me on social media, I was posting pictures of the progress of the printing, which is really cool to see because literally it's almost scary to watch this print because it literally brings the filament out almost the full distance of the build plate and then stops and comes back again, creating our Droop Loop. Now, I probably could have, when I scaled this up, lowered the base down into the print bed a little bit and added a really thick brim or skirt around the edge there to hold it down. And that way the loops would have drooped a little bit closer to the print bed and it would have created a bushier tree. But I was really happy with the way the print was going, so I let it finish. Now this was a little bit of a longer print too, because obviously we scaled this up to 419.99 millimeters. I actually plugged in 420 millimeters because that's the safe height of my gMax printer that I like to go to. But Simplify 3D rounded it off, which is fine. I'm fine with that setting. So the tree itself printed out fine, but I knew I had to finish the tree. So the next thing we printed out at that same scale was our cool little star. And for this, like I said, we used some of that AMZ 3D's translucent yellow filament, and this really turned out awesome. Now it has a little piece of built-in support material on the bottom because it prints standing up. And I noticed that when I was in Simplify 3D that the little tips of the star weren't quite contacting the print bed perfectly. So I did lower it down a little bit to get a little bit more contact with the print bed, even though there was a little piece of support material that I knew would attach to it. And then of course I attached a brim around the edge so it would make sure it stuck down on the print bed for the length of the print. The next part of the print was to print out these little ornaments. Now I didn't really need to address these in any special way. I just put a brim around the edge just to make sure because this is a really small footprint for the print. But the settings in Simplify 3D were pretty basic. It's the same as I did for the star print because I'm using some of that AMZ translucent blue. And these guys turned out awesome. And they have this really cool built-in hook on the bottom or on the top of them, so you can just grab a loop and hook them on. So after decorating the tree and putting the star on the top, I think I might still add some LEDs to it. But for now, I'm super happy with the way this turned out. There's a really cool method here, which is a printing failure, to create this really cool fuzzy look on the 3D printed tree. And of course, my gMax 1.5 XT Plus did a stellar job on the prints. Like I said, I probably could have lowered this down on the print bed and it would have made a more bushier tree, but I'm really happy with this. One thing I would note if you're going to try and print this yourself, depending on the size you print it at, is to make sure you follow some of those settings that I showed you in Simplify 3D. So it gives you more of a staggered print and you don't have as many thick branches because this turned out perfectly. I'm really happy with the results. One of the other things to note too is that if you do lower it down on the print bed, you might want to adjust your cooling because if you do a little less cooling, it'll give the plastic a little bit more time to slowly sag and harden up. If you're using a lot of cooling on this, it may blow the loops around. Now if I turn the tree, you can see it looks different from a couple different angles. And that's because I had my gMax cooling setting set up to I think 65% of the fan speed, which is probably a little bit high for some of this types of printing. But again, if you play around a little bit, you should be able to get a really cool Droop Loop Christmas tree look for yourself. And of course this AMZ 3D green filament was the perfect color, and I really like the little translucent look that I was able to get on the ornaments and of course the star. And like I said, I'm thinking about adding some LEDs to it and lighting it up for Christmas. Well, that about wraps it up for today. Happy holidays to all my friends and family out there in the 3D printing community, to all my subscribers here on YouTube, and all my followers on social media. I hope you guys found this episode interesting and informative, and if you're looking for ways to support the channel, check out that Patreon link and all the other affiliate links down in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, comment, like, and share those videos, and I'll talk to you guys soon.